I call to order this regular meeting of the Scottsdale Unified School District. It is January 21st, 2020, and the time is 5:04 p.m. Please stand. Board Member Perleberg, will you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we will have a roll call starting from my far right.
Jan Michael Greenberg.
Sandy Kravitz.
Barbara Perleberg. And Patty Beckman. President Beckham is unavailable this evening, but we do have a quorum. Next, do any board members have any changes to the agenda? No? Okay. I move to approve the agenda as presented. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Kravitz seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 4-0. The agenda is presented, or is approved. Now we move on to our students and staff recognitions and celebrations. We call on Dr. Creekard.
Thank you, Vice President Beckman. Members of the board, we have some outstanding recognitions to share with you today. Our Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education, Dr. Melissa Sakos, is going to kick things off for us. Dr. Sakos.
Vice President Beckman. I have to practice. Vice President Beckman, members of the board, Dr. Creekard and Sandra. It is my pleasure to be up here with some student celebration. As you well know, SUSD is home to some of the most creative and outstanding students, whether that is on stage, in the classroom, or on the field. One of those students is Jake Oakham from Desert Mountain High School. Jake, will you and your principal, Dr. Hirsch, along with your teacher, please join me at the podium? Breaking news. This is Jake's mom and the robotics teacher. Wow, very special. All right. Jake is one of 5 career and technical education students from around the state to be nominated to be a U.S. Presidential Scholar by State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Kathy Hoffman. The U.S. Presidential Scholars Program was established in 1964 by executive order of the President to recognize and honor some of our nation's most distinguished graduating high school seniors. And I have the chills. In 1979, the program was extended to recognize students who demonstrate exceptional talent in the visual, creative, and performing arts. And in 2015, the program was again extended to recognize students who demonstrate ability and accomplishment in career and technical education fields. Each year, up to 161 students are named as Presidential Scholars, one of the nation's highest honor for high school students. The nomination process started with Jake's CTE graphic design teacher, Bernie Fritz, who unfortunately could not be here this evening. Were he here, Mr. Fritz would tell us that Jake's outstanding achievements in his graphic classes during the Desert Mountain career and how he has become a mentor for other students, not only in graphic design, but also in other major academic endeavors in his life. Robotics. He is also into karate, but we do not teach that in SUSD. I hope I'm going to stand over here. And in robotics, it started way back in elementary school with Legos and now developed into an engineer designing and building robotics with his school team and taking them to complete their first robotics competition around the state. Jake exemplifies what it means to be a well-rounded yet specific student. He takes AP and honors classes. He has already taken engineering classes through ASU. And also of note is Jake was recently honored by the SUSD Foundation for his excellence and contribution to his school. He is friendly, a terrific student. He applies himself to everything he does with gusto and is, in general, someone students want to be friends with and whose company they seek. If ever there were an SUSD CTE student who deserves national recognition through the Presidential Scholars Program, Jake is it. Congratulations, Jake. Would you like to say a few words?
I would, yeah.
Oh.
Thank you, everyone. First, I would like to thank Dr. Sakos for all of your support. Thank you, Dr. Creekard, our superintendent, for your and the outstanding members of the SUSD board for all that you do for SUSD. I'm a proud almost graduate of SUSD and the best school district in Arizona. I would like to thank Dr. Hirsch for your support and recognition in this award in graphic design and robotics programs that you offer at Desert Mountain High School. Without your support, I would never have received the opportunities that have come my way. Thank you, Mr. Fritz, who unfortunately could not be here today, for nominating me for this award and for continuing to provide me with opportunities to excel in graphic design. I could not have dreamed of a better role model and mentor in high school. Next, I would like to thank my robotics teacher, who also coincidentally is my mom. I've been extremely blessed to I've had the opportunity to be part of a robotics program that has won more awards and recognitions than years that I've been alive. Next year, I plan to continue on to Arizona State University to join the Arizona State University Bear at the Honors College and obtain a dual major in mechanical and robotics engineering with a minor in graphic design. I know that none of this would be possible without the assistance and cooperation of the entire SUSD community. Thank you to everyone at SUSD. You all make such a difference. Thank you.
Don't go too far, Jake. Very well stated. Thank you. I want to give you an SUSD challenge coin, signifying your accomplishments while you have been here with us in the Scottsdale School District. Take it with you on your future journeys, which I'm sure are going to be outstanding and bring great credit to you and your family. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Now you touch it.
Go Sun Devils.
Thank you, Dr. Sakos, and congratulations, Jake. I'd like to add one more detail to this story and announce that the Desert Mountain ACE, short for Aspiring Creative Engineers robotics team, was on the winning alliance this past weekend at the first Robotics Tech Challenge tournament in Cave Creek. It also won the tournament's Connect Award, given to the team that most connects with its local community. The ACE team will next compete in the state FTC First Tech Competition Challenge tournament at Northern Arizona University next month. So congratulations and good luck to the robotics team. Moving on, our Assistant Superintendent for Educational Services, Dr. Kim Guerin, has our next celebration, which fortunately for SUSD students is usually an annual one. Dr. Guerin.
Good evening, Vice President Beckman, Governing Board members, Dr. Creekhart, and Ms. Como. We are here tonight to recognize and honor teachers who have completed the rigorous process of achieving National Board Certification. National Board Certification was designed to develop, retain, and recognize accomplished teaching and to generate ongoing improvement in schools nationwide. It is the most respected professional certification available in K-12 education in the United States. One of SUSD's greatest strengths is the number of National Board Certified teachers. It is evident of our teachers' commitment to growing their practice, their commitment to accomplished teaching, their commitment to deliver the best instruction to SUSD students. 27 of our schools have National Board Certified teachers on staff, and we're told we have more National Board Certified teachers than any school district in the state of Arizona. It is my great honor to introduce to you this afternoon Scottsdale Unified School District's 6 newly appointed National Board Certified teachers. When I call your name, would you please join me at the podium? Brittany Boslag from Cocopa Middle School. Carmen Buchanan from Arcadia High School, and she has an ill little one tonight, so she won't be here with us tonight, but let's give her a hand. Lori Campos from Cherokee Elementary School. Tammy Coley from Desert Canyon Elementary School. Lindsay Saylor from Cheyenne Traditional School. And Sarah Wagner Bustilla from Arcadia High School. I would also like you to meet SUSD's 6 new recertified National Board teachers. This process is so rigorous that you have to be recertified in a period of time. So please join me in applauding Tammy Andreas from Cochise Elementary School. Catherine Honeycutt from Desert Canyon Elementary School. Lori Jones-Ritt from Cherokee Elementary School. Laura Komka from Desert Mountain High School. Kelly O'Rourke from Desert Canyon Middle School. Debbie Voris from Hopi Elementary School. These teachers do not go down this road to certification by themselves. SUSD has a cadre of current and former teachers who coach, assist, push, really push when necessary, applicants towards certification and recertification. I think this is one of the pieces of magic to our success. Would our candidate support providers please join us? Abby Bobbitt from Laguna Elementary School. Susan Leonard, our lead CSP from Ingleside Middle School. Mary Zungalowitz and Bobby Faulkner. Both retired but still supporting. One of our renewed teachers, Tammy Andreas, teaches first grade at Cochise. Tammy is also a candidate support provider and has some thoughts about the dual role of National Board certification to share with us this afternoon. Tammy?
Good evening, Vice President Beckman, Governing Board members, Dr. Creekard, and Mrs. Como. The journey to become a National Board Certified teacher is highly personal and unique for each one of us. However, each of our journeys bears similarities. The desire to challenge ourselves and continually seek ways to better meet the needs of our students are common threads. I didn't start teaching till I was almost 40 years old. After about a decade, I felt the need for a new challenge, and I seriously considered leaving the teaching profession. Then I heard about the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. This was during the years of Career Ladder. A year-long pre-candidacy class was being offered as an alternative to writing a Student Progress Assessment Report, otherwise known as SPAR. This was a new challenge, a way to become a better teacher, and a way to get out of doing the SPAR, so I was in. At the end of that year, my outlook was totally transformed. The National Board's 5 core propositions and the standards exemplify best practice, and I was ready to put my practice under a microscope. Little did I know that this would be the most difficult challenge I had ever faced professionally, and that it would be the most worthwhile and rigorous professional development I had ever undertaken. The moments of analysis and reflection that all teachers experience mid-lesson, on the drive home, in the shower, are magnified 100-fold. Candidates spend months analyzing their decisions and how those decisions impact their students. We constantly ask ourselves, why am I doing this for these students at this time and in this place? We provide concrete evidence of our analysis and reflection through technical writing, videos, and student work samples. I am not ashamed to say that I was almost ready to quit and cried a few times. I doubted my ability to complete the process, but I did. Once achieved, board certification served as a platform for teachers to continue to grow professionally and to become leaders. Within a year of certifying, I took on the new challenge of becoming a candidate support provider, or CSP. This included extensive cognitive coaching training, workshops on how to teach pre-candidacy classes, and trainings on how to be an effective and ethical coach. My fellow CSPs and I have the privilege of working with candidates from across the state of Arizona. I always come away from a coaching session having learned as much from my candidates as they have from me. Last year, I successfully took on the challenge of renewing my certificate. As a candidate, once again, I benefited tremendously from working collaboratively with my fellow renewal candidates and my CSPs. SUSD does have the highest number of MBCTs in the state. This is in large part because of our multi-layered support system. Through our monthly cohort meetings, we have created generations of MBCTs in SUSD now, from the colleagues who were my CSPs to myself and the colleagues I certified with, and now the colleagues we have mentored who have become CSPs themselves. Our district is an integral part of this support system. We are grateful to the district and the Scottsdale Foundation and Churros for the financial support and incentives they provide, as well as for the district's administrative support. In addition, no other state has an organization like the Arizona K-12 Center, whose mission is to improve teaching and learning on many different levels, including national board certification. Accomplished teachers recognize that their professional growth never ends, and so there will always be new, exciting challenges. I'd like to leave you with a sentence stem that we are given as candidates, and it resonates with us throughout our teaching careers. They give us this during pre-candidacy, and we put it on our walls, because I know, I do, which impacts student learning by. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy, and thank you and congratulations to our candidates. I am so excited to join all of you at the Celebration of Accomplished Teaching, which is the Oscars of teachers. So I get to join these ladies on the red carpet and celebrate all that they do for SUSD students, and it is quite a celebration. We would like to honor you with plaques and challenge coins to acknowledge your accomplishments. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Guerin, and congratulations, teachers, and thank you for your hard work and professionalism, taking on that task and completing it. Vice President Beckman, if I may, I would like to go on to the comments section. Tell you about some pretty spectacular writers at Cheyenne Traditional School. Last Friday, Cheyenne eighth grade students Caitlin Standard and Littleton Woodruff were named winners of the Arizona Education Foundation's Polly Rosenbaum State Creative Writing Contest. We will introduce, this happened so late, but we will introduce them at next month's governing board meeting. Next, I want to tell you about a week-long celebration next month of a group of somewhat unsung heroes at both public and private schools around the country, school counselors. These dedicated education professionals help students reach their full potential by helping them identify and explore their interests, abilities, strengths, and talents. They help parents focus on ways to further the educational, personal, and social growth of their children. Working with parents and the post-secondary community, school counselors help guide our students to future paths in education and career, and give them that extra ounce of courage, if they need it, to submit an application to that Ivy League school of their dreams. School counselors are an integral part of the American education system, and I hope you join me in thanking our school counselors anytime, but especially the first week of February, February 3rd through the 7th, which is National School Counseling Week. Lastly, of these comments, I would like to congratulate Coronado High School, whose baseball and softball teams have been awarded a $5,000 grant from the Arizona Diamondbacks Foundation and Chase Bank as part of their Chase Your Dreams program. Together, the D-backs and Chase will provide Coronado teams with this charitable investment as well as expert guidance and support, all designed to empower the school coaches, educators, parents, and mentors to help Coronado's baseball and softball student athletes reach their academic and athletic potential. I imagine Principal Palatucci is already in the dugout with her lineup cards, determining how best to distribute this gift. Thank you, Arizona Diamondbacks and Chase Bank, for supporting the donors, the Dons, by the donors. And then lastly, something that I have done in my career as a school superintendent at this time of the year is to talk a little bit about the state of the district at this point. So with that, I would like to ask Dr. Sackos to come forward and be my Vanna.
Of course. Are you sure you want me up here?
Let us know when you're ready, Dr. Sackos.
I got this. I got it.
The state of the district. First of all, talk about a few of the many accomplishments, in addition to the things that we talk about in our recognitions at every one of the board meetings. I would say, I think it's so important that we remember some of the things of which we are most proud. And the first is thanking the community and working through with our staff support on passing of the M&O override with a 61% approval rate. I, for one, did not believe 18 months ago that that was possible. And thanks to the daily work of our teachers in the classroom, of our principals in the schools, and everybody in the district to restore confidence and trust in the district, that passed, and it will benefit the students for the next 5 years. Secondly, we received just before the winter break the Hanover Research District Climate Study, and in that climate study, the recommendations from the findings. And it's interesting because Hanover Research, a well-known national recognized organization who not only took the 14,000 participants of the survey and tabulated the data from those surveys, but also disaggregated the surveys so that we know how parents feel about our schools, how community members feel about schools, staff members, and students. From those results and from those data, the recommendations came out, and the number one recommendation is that the district maintain its district's current course. Perceptions regarding the district's overall direction, district and school leadership, and parent and community engagement all improved significantly over the past year. In some cases, our approval rate went up as much as 20 points, but on an average on these selected questions from Hanover Research, 16 points of approval. That's fantastic. Next, we received some grants a large number of grants, and I wanted to just highlight 3 of them. The first is the 5E Gear Up Award that Coronado received. This is a grant for $320,000 a year for 7 years to help turn the community that Coronado serves around and improve academic achievement and college preparedness. Secondly, we received 2 of the statewide school safety grants for Coronado High School and Tonalea K-8. That provide a full-time social worker at each school. And thirdly, the Gifted program that was also made available through the state legislature that provides additional funds to serve our gifted students. The next 3 are the school grades, the ADE, the Arizona Department of Education, through their formula based on AZ merit scores, students' growth, graduation rates, and so forth, grades students based on that formula, grade schools, 27 of our 29 school sites received an A or a B. 62% of our schools were A schools. And notably, Coronado High School moved from a C to a B. So congratulations to all those schools. In terms of enrollment, we've made some significant strides in turning the trend of major decline to almost flat. Last year, in the 18-19 school year, the district lost 600 students. This year, in the 100th day, which was last Friday, compared to the 100th day last year, we lost 6 students. Almost a flattening of that trend of decline. And then lastly, I think we should be proud of, and the accomplishment, and thank you to the board for supporting the rebuild of Cherokee Elementary School, Hohokam Elementary School, and now we've started the process of architect selection for Kiva Elementary School. 3 aging schools that have a design, and certainly a Cherokee and Hohokam that have gone through the design phase that promotes modern day teaching and learning and teacher collaboration in that learning, and with great voice given to the community is what they need and want for their schools, and we appreciate that. Those are our accomplishments. Thank you. But certainly we continue to have challenges, and with those challenges, opportunities. The first challenge that we have coming up in this next year is the transition to a new superintendent and a new chief financial officer. Those selections will be made this spring, starting for the next school year on July 1. Secondly, we have AZ merit scores. In our AZ merit scores, we could celebrate the fact that our English language arts scores increased from 2015 to 2019 in grades 3 through 9, or that our math scores increased in that same time, 2015 to 19, in all grades but grade 8. But that's not enough. Those achievements have not been consistent. We need to continue the work that we have begun this year in rigor and instructional practices and instructional leadership. And certainly, we must begin to develop plans to change the direction of what is known as the middle school drop. A significant drop in all of our middle schools nationally, but certainly here is the one that we can work on. We also need to continue work on improving our social, emotional well-being of students, as well as the disparity that is noticed in the Hanover research between student and adult perceptions of what goes on at schools. A challenge that we have for the future is also to solidify partnerships that we have in our community. Partnerships with the Charros, with Arizona State University, and with the city of Scottsdale. We have great opportunities there that will do nothing but help our students and our teachers in the classrooms, but we need to continue to work on those partnerships. And thirdly, we need to have a long-range plan for the budget, as several key issues, key pieces of the budget will sunset in the next handful of years, and we need to be prepared for that. I think Mr. Gadd will talk about some of that at a later agenda item tonight, but I think to keep that in mind as one of our future challenges this year. Overall, I believe that the district has corrected issues from the Attorney General's mandates 18 months ago when I took over that we were still working on, and other issues while improving the teaching and the learning environment, as well as community engagement, as noticed in the Hanover report. And so with that, to me, it means the district is ripe to take significant steps forward, both in academics and social and emotional areas. A new superintendent, a new CFO, and much of the existing staff that is here can work together to continue what we have begun and really take some significant strides. Remember the recommendation of the Hanover report: maintain the district's current course, which is onward and upward, not stagnant. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Creekard. Okay, we move now to our first set of public comments. This is a call for public comment for non-agenda items, items not listed on the agenda, and consent agenda items. These may be brought to the governing board's attention under this section of the agenda. Due to open meeting law, the governing board cannot discuss or take action on items not listed on the agenda. Comments are limited to 3 minutes, and one person cannot give his or her time to another to increase the number of minutes an individual may speak. For items listed on the agenda as information or discussion items or action items, the public will be afforded an opportunity to comment on those as they come up. Okay, Sandra, do I have all the cards? Yes. I do. Okay, our first public comment comes from Karen Trion.
Good evening, Vice President Beckman, members of the board, Dr. Creekard, Ms. Como. Last week I heard that the criminal trial of Laura Smith has been postponed until March. As we all know, Laura Smith was the SUSD CFO during Denise Birdwell's tenure as superintendent. Ms. Smith is facing 12 felony counts alleging wrongdoing in her capacity as the SUSD CFO. I'm bringing this up now not to rehash old news, but because 3 of our current board members oversaw and empowered that administration. 2 years later, we, the public, have heard very little in the way of reflection or lessons learned about that painful chapter in our history, a chapter we have not yet fully closed. We don't know what you regret, what you would have done, what you wish you would have done differently, why you ignored and rejected so many pleas for intervention, or even what, if anything, you think went wrong. The same 3 of you have terms ending this year. We don't know if you're running for re-election, but you are about to hire our next superintendent. This is the most important decision you will make, and it will affect us for years. I have a few requests. Number 1, I ask that you prioritize integrity and character above everything else. I'm not simply hoping for law-abiding behavior. I'm asking for impeccably high standards. Our superintendent should set an example of public service that everyone else strives to emulate. You have that now in Dr. Creekard, and I expect you to hire someone who continues this. Number 2, I ask that you actively listen to your community and ensure that you are representing our priorities as you make this decision, rather than simply advancing your own personal agendas. Teachers and staff know better than anyone else what is needed in our schools. Are you giving them a voice, a seat at the table? Are you ensuring that your new hire respects teachers and staff and is committed to working with them? Are you listening to the voices of parents, students, and community members? Are you ensuring that your new hire will be responsive to those voices? Number 3, I ask that you prioritize hiring a superintendent who embraces the unified nature of our school district. I hope you make sure that your hire understands all levels of our district, from preschool to high school, and sees the value and potential in that structure. Please make sure that this superintendent will nurture a collaborative and continue to nurture a collaborative and cooperative environment so that our schools can be consistent and transitions be smooth while sharing best practices and improving together. There is just no excuse for some students in our district getting the gold standard and others getting far less. We need to finally move past the Pam Kirby and Denise Birdwell culture of division and disconnection. Number 4, please hire someone who is at his or her core an educator. Our next superintendent will not succeed unless he or she is guided and motivated by the needs of students above all else. Your decision will define the next generation of SUSD. Please be community-minded, collaborative, and in tune with SUSD students, staff, and citizens as you make this vitally important decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Treon. Okay, we move now to our information and discussion items. First one is 7A, the 2019-2020 M&O budget update. Dr. Creekard?
Thank you, Vice President Beckman, and I would like to introduce Mr. Gadd, our Chief Financial Officer, who will have the next 3 agenda items.
Should work.
I suspect one after the other. Mr. Gadd.
Thank you, Dr. Creekard. Madam Vice President, members of the audience. There are 3 PowerPoints that I'm going to be presenting this evening that the first one encompasses the current year, the second one is a projection for next year, and the third one is a projection for 3 years out. It's important to understand what some of these components are because it has a significant bearing on the district's finances in the future, its programs, its number of staff, etc. Starting off with 1920, which is on the screen currently. This M&O budget that you know is based upon membership. As Dr. Creekard said, we had based the budget back last July when it was approved by the board with a loss of almost 600 students. And remember, we're talking about average daily membership here. We're not talking enrollment. We're talking about membership, which is gauged with when students come in and how many days they are here before the 100th day triggers. So those are 2 different numbers. In this particular case, we're talking ADM. This is as of 12/5. We have an increase from that plus, or that's 500 or 600 decline. We have a plus of 477. So substantially more students than we had predicted, which is really good news for the finance formula. And then we take that number and we put it into a fairly complex formula that's dictated by statute that you have up here on the screen. And it takes you through a calculation that revises how much money you can spend in your operating budget for the current year. We have to remember that the current year spending capacity or spending ceiling is based upon the current year average daily membership. It is not backward looking, it is current year looking. Meaning that you make an estimate in July and you have to revise your budget in May to take into account the actual 100th day ADM, which will occur sometime next month. So here is the formula, and it stretches on for a couple of pages. And the general budget limit is calculated at 165 million. The budget adopted limit is 164 million. As we go down through this list, everything basically remains the same other than the calculation using the ADM count that I just talked about. One thing that you'll note here that is different than other budget projections that we have done is that item that's about third up from the bottom. This formula will, as you will see in a minute, raises about 3 million additional to our M&O budget. That's a plan that would be hard to implement the spending at that level between February 1st and the end of the school year. So from a strategy standpoint, you'll notice on that third from the bottom, we have chosen to assign 2.7 million, 2/3 roughly, of the additional funding to the district's capital budget. And there's a reason for that. We don't want to lose it, and we want to use it for next year on a rollover. And we also want to use it next year to help us with the M&O budget, because that will be one of the more difficult years that we have. So that's what that's all about, and I think it will become clear as we move a little further on with the presentation. The change in the general budget limit between what was adopted and what we estimate it to be now is $3.7 million of additional funds. So that's really great news for the district, and the question now is, how do we spend that money? What do we do with it between now and June 30th? We're proposing that we spend and identify $1 million worth of additional classroom technology. That probably is smartboards and Chromebooks and those kinds of things, and we will deal with it campus by campus in terms of what individual schools have as their priority to deal with additional technology at their school. We also are earmarking $1.7 million for textbook adoption. As the board is aware, we've fallen behind a bit on how current our textbooks are. This gives us an opportunity to catch up on some of that, because that $1.7 million will be added to the normal amount that we have in textbooks, and we will have over $4 million available next year in 2021 with this carry forward to adopt 2 full subject areas. And Dr. Gurn can talk to you a little bit about that, but the 2 subject areas are social studies and English and language adoptions. So to round out this $3.7 million, we also have to account in the budget for additional positions that were added because of the increased enrollment, particularly teachers. And that's the $1,055,000. So what we have done is we've taken the additional funds, and we are proposing that roughly 2/3 of that amount be earmarked for capital, and 1/3 of that amount needs to cover the costs we've already incurred in employing staff to deal with additional numbers of students. So how do we summarize this? We had projected a loss of 596 students. We now are projecting, from an ADM standpoint, not enrollment, but ADM, a loss of 119. Obviously, it was a decided improvement. That leaves us with this 477 as additional students that were able to calculate how much additional money the district is entitled to for the current year. And of that $3.7 million, as I've talked about already, $2.7 million would be assigned to capital, and $1 million is already assigned to staff that was necessary to hire in order to cover the needs of the 477 students we did not anticipate. So that's an overview of what's happening with the current year budget. Unless the board chooses to alter some of these recommendations, they will be in front of you for approval at the May board meeting when we are required by the state to approve a revised budget for this year. So if we can't implement the entire capital amount that's listed here, this $2.7 million, because of time, then that entire 2.7 amount will carry forward into next year's capital budget and add to whatever we normally would budget in capital for technology and for textbooks. And that will give then the district the benefit of that money for 2021 in a couple of fairly major areas. And as you'll see as we get into 2021, we then, after 2021, we move this capital amount into M&O, because that's where the shortfall is going to happen with the expiration of the governor's 2020 plan. His 2020 plan expires the end of next year. And so whatever ADM loss we have, et cetera, we won't be benefited by an additional large infusion of money from the governor's office unless something changes dramatically with his budget projection, or the legislature, or whatever might change in order to give districts more money. So what you have is a 10% increase and a 5 and a 5 and then 0 as far as the state is concerned. It's up to the district at that point with its own local resources to decide what it wants to do with that subject that now has been dealt with by the state for 3 years. So, questions on any of this?
Any questions from board members? I have one. Mr. Gadd, or, I don't know. Can you talk about the curriculum, the world language, I think it is? Is that what the adoption? Is that the 1.7? Yeah.
Here, Kim, try this.
Thank you. This year, we are adopting world language. We will bring that forward for your consideration in February. We are planning a K-12 social studies adoption next year, and that was already slated. We have new social studies standards next year that are going to be implemented, so this will help us prepare for that. We had an English language arts adoption slated, but funding's not there. 9-12 was already planned. We're looking at new needs in K-8 regarding a robust English language program that's going to have interventions, tiered systems, and diagnostic reading assessments. So that is something that we need that we haven't had the budget for, so we would be able to do both next year. We are surveying teachers to understand their specific needs and how we can best address those needs. And of course, that would be a robust committee process before making any decisions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay. Mr. Gadd?
Let's move on with 2021. It's not 2021. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so we're going to shift gears now from what we would recommend to the board in revising the current year budget to what we predict for next year. And here's some assumptions that go into that projection. We have put into the projection an estimated ADM loss of 275. I'm sure the board's well aware, and as you know from the demographer, it's very difficult to predict from one year to the next with school choice where you go. So we've kind of compromised between where we are now, which is relatively flat, to where we were last year, which was almost 600. We kind of picked a midpoint. And so it's continuing the 119, which assumes that that's built in because we don't know any better, and adds some to it. The demographer had predicted for next year a decline of 327. So we are not predicting as high as the demographer has predicted, but we're not as conservative as maybe some would like. We're trying to middle of the road kind of thing and see where the ADM goes for next year. It's hard to know. The inflation factor is 1.89 in the governor's budget for this coming year, and so that's what we've used here. We are predicting that the budget balance carry forward remains relatively flat at 6% of the total M&O. The projection includes a 5% salary adjustment for teachers. This is the end of the 2020 plan. It's I think, interesting to note that because the state calculates this 5% off of a statewide average teacher salary, we actually have to add $1 million to it to make it 5% for our staff. And I think you know that from other presentations, but that's basically a calculation that we have to do. And this is the last year, this 2021 will be the last year of the governor's infusion of money for teacher salary increases. We're not including any projection of insurance increases because we believe that the Employee Benefit Trust Fund, and we've projected that out over 5 years recently, in the last month or so, is in fine shape to be able to absorb not only the estimated increase in next year's budget, but as you'll see fairly soon, it's assumed that it can easily deal with the next 3 years. And I believe it can because the magnitude of where we started at. But so over time, that balance will erode. But it's going to take a while. And when it does, and you'll see that coming, I'm sure, years before it actually happens, that's the time where the district is going to need to make a decision about what do they now want to do with employee benefits once that reserve position has been exhausted in the trust fund. State retirement increase is going up 0.1%. That will put it almost at 13%, so it's a fairly large number. That's 13% for the employee, 13% for the employer. It's 12.7, I think, something like that. No additional contributions from cash control funds. So we are predicting for 2021 that the $2 million the board has previously approved for this year remains the same. We tap those four funds for a $2 million amount collectively. And we don't see any issues with that. And I know Speckman has asked for a projection. We should have that out next week so that you'll know where those funds would be at the end of 2021, as near as we can predict, assuming this continuation, because we've done $2 million this year, going to do another $2 next year. So the balance will start to drop some as we continue on with this withdrawal process. And it assigns the $2 million used for capital in 1920 back to M&O. This is kind of confusing because you carry it forward into capital. But what we're carrying forward with that 2.7 is an ADM count that's generating it. Remember, that's that 477 that we added. What we did is we took the 477 and put it and calculated it in the formula and pulled it back out for 2021 to be used for M&O. It's a carry forward, though, in capital from 1920. That's what gets the capital budget as high as it is, and we've described that additional textbook and technology. So it's bringing money from last year as a budget balance carry forward in capital, but then taking that ADM that generated that and turning it back into M&O for 2021. It's a bit of a complex process, but that gives us additional budget capacity then in 2021 and retains that $2.7 million for the purposes that I talked about, which are technology and textbooks. It also assigns $500,000 from additional Prop 123 money to capital for technology. The board may recall that Proposition 123 was passed about 5 years ago, and it relies on state trust land money. That additional, that at the 5-year interval of a 10-year authorization, because remember that was voted through a proposition, it was authorized for 10 years. The 5-year authorization is now up, and it was at $50 million statewide. It's now the second 5-year term, and that's up to, instead of $50 million, $75 million. So it was intended as an increase in the second half of its longevity. That's what this $500,000 is. So we thought maybe we should bank it, just as we did with the 2.7, so that later on, and spend it on technology, but later on then bring it back into the M&O budget, because we believe in 21, 22, and beyond, that's where the need's going to be. But in the meantime, let's not just have it turn into cash balance, let's move it forward into a use for 2021. And here's the formula for 2021, the same one you saw for 1920. It goes down through the formula. You can see that the state trust land, the 2020 plan is in the third line down at $3.1 million. That's the last installment. That's the 5%. It increases the base support level by $110. And as you move down the formula, of course, the M&O override at the bottom is 15% of a higher number, because that higher number has been increased by both the state effort toward salary increases and the inflation factor. So it's a bit higher. We needed to subtract some things, add some things, excuse me, from the formula, the basic formula itself. So, and these are standard items that you're able to put in the budget as long as you feel that you can actually earn them during the year. So tuition income, the M&O desegregation plan is guaranteed, but that's one important thing to mention, is it never increases. It was frozen by the legislature about 10 years ago, and so it stays at that $7.3 million forever unless the legislature chooses to change the law. So it forces the amount of programming you can do in the DSEG plan down because you're constantly using more of that number for salary increases, maintenance of staff, et cetera. Social Security, state retirement, et cetera. So what's important to note about this one is it erodes the program over the years because it has no ability to increase because of the legislation. This state trust land subject is there for 1.5 million. That's the amount that will be applicable in 2021. We've taken that 500,000 that we talked about, which is an increase, it's a part of the 1.5, and removed it from the M&O budget so that we could put it in capital and carry it over to the following year. So we've tried to hedge the out-year budgets with using it for capital, and then as soon as that's done, pulling that money back over to the M&O budget and using it for operations. And so that's a strategy that's here throughout. One thing important to note about the Prop 123 is it sunsets itself after 10 years. 24-25 will be the last year that Prop 123 will exist. It's similar to 301, where the legislature finally extended it. This one, 5 years from now, that $1.5 million is gone from every district's budget, unless it's revoted or the legislature chooses to step in, as they did with Prop 301, and extend the sunset date of 24-25. If that doesn't happen, then everybody, including us, will be $1.5 million short in our operating budget, and we'll have to see. I mean, everybody's aware, most people are aware of the implication. It's a cliff. It's not a ratchet down. It's completely falls away. Okay, so that creates a general budget limit of 174 million. And then we take that and compare it to our 1920 general budget limit. And we have a difference of about $8 million between the two. That difference comes about 3.2 million is the end of the 2020 plan. It's the 5% from the governor's office. We have about $2 million coming from the 1.89 inflation factor. And then the infusion of capital back in to the 174 creates this $8 million. We would have had 6 had we not brought back out of capital that amount that we talked about in 1920. So, there are some fixed cost increases that we envision at this point. They're not awfully major, but they need to be considered. We've set aside, as we did last year, a dollar amount for program increases. We don't know what those are. They could be a number of different things. But it does give the district the ability, before it finalizes this budget this coming June, to identify some additional spending that you want to do in the operating budget, whether that's whatever the subject is, certified staff, classified staff, etc. Contracted custodial, there's a clause in that contract where there is an inflationary factor, and of course that many of those staff that are employed by the contractor are subject to the minimum wage. So that contractor is paying now $12 an hour versus what the previous number was. SRO, that usually is an increase requested by the city. And utility increases, it's time for us to do a little bit with that, not a whole lot. We put in 1%. So a total increase of these fixed costs, if you want to term them that, with the exception of the beginning one, would add up to $714,000. And then we gave you some numbers here. If you did all staff now, it's important, this is not just teachers, it's everybody. 1 million, or 1% is 1.2 million, 3 is 3.8, and 5 is 6.4. So, as you know, I don't need to tell you this, but as you know, the governor has this expectation that with the final 5, at least teachers get 5%. That's, So if you would then go to the bottom one for teachers, which is the lion's share of that amount, of course, and if you wanted then to have other employees have that same percentage of salary increase, and we did that for this year, then you would need to pull 6.4 in order to do that. And so we gave you 3 different scenarios, 1, 3, and 5. There's a couple things in here that I should mention. As you see, the program increase amount is flat across the three levels of salary increase at 714. We did put in an additional teacher contingency. That is an FTE count that should class sizes in leveling classes exceed the standard. We have a place in which to hire additional teachers should that occur, and we hope that it will because it means our enrollment is up rather than down. We did put in some money for social workers and guidance counselors. This is above the results-based funding 2 positions that the district achieved. We haven't broken it out as to which of those 2. That's about $380,000. And then we did put some money as a classified contingency. There are things, I think, some reclassifications. There's that minimum wage piece. We have to do something with the starting salary for bus drivers. I will tell you that, or we're not going to have anybody driving. So, and it's a fairly large one. It will eat up most of that 198 just to try to get that beginning wage higher than our competitors out there, which is every other school district. We also put in a contingency for ADM. If instead of 275 the loss is 3 1/4, then we put in $250,000 to buffer that additional loss. We hope that that won't be needed, and we can tell you this time next year, after the 100th day is close to being completed, how much extra money you have, and you will have that same presentation that I did to start with, which is how do you want to spend the extra money. I hope that's the case. But if not, at least I think we have planned adequately for what the most likely scenario is with student loss. And so if you go across that, if we only did a 1%, we'd have 5.2 million left. If we did 3, we'd have 2.6. If you did the full 5 for all staff, we're just about balanced on the budget with $68,000 remaining. So that's our projection for next year, depending upon which salary level the district believes that we should gravitate to. We are at the January 21st date, which is the second date in the calendar. We may ask you to add one after February 4th. It depends on what we hear legislatively, and otherwise there's a meeting on February 18th, I believe. We're not planning on that now, but we may need it, so we'll insert that if we do need it. So this whole PowerPoint presentation will be back to you on February 4th, and whatever input you can give us will help us prepare then for next year's budget. We also will be on February 4th giving you a first review of the capital budget. That is a $13 million plus budget. $3 million of which we have anticipated is coming from the governor's restoration of the entire cut to capital, and his budget includes that a year early, so we've included that also. And then March 3rd, and that's a key date, is we would like you to, as you did this year, give tentative approval to the salary schedules so that we can move ahead with issuing contracts and try to get out into the market as early as possible. We have tentative approval for the capital budget on April 7th. That allows us to get some ordering done and hopefully some deliveries before school restarts next year. We have the formal dates that you have to do. The approval of the proposed budget would be on June 9th, and the public hearing adoption would be on June 23rd. And there are some public meetings. We have put them up on school marquees. We're trying to advertise as much as we can. We're planning on a public hearing on January 30th at Mojave at the MDA, and then another one on February 27th. We hope that we will get some attendance, similar to what we did with the override. And anybody can come and ask questions and whatever, and we will show them the PowerPoints that we just shared with you. And then there are a couple of staff meetings, district administrative meeting on February 6th, and then an executive leadership meeting on February 11th. So we have 4 exposure meetings for purposes of the 2021 both M&O and capital budgets. So, if you don't have some questions here, we'll push on to the last one, but if you do, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Board Member Greenberg.
Just a couple questions. So, with the bus drivers that you mentioned, and the need to increase that, out of curiosity, have we contacted the ADE and DES for their program? I believe they're expanding their program.
I'm not sure, Mr. Green.
From Mesa, the hiring of bus drivers. I believe I shared that with you in an email, Dr. Creekard. Have we followed up on that at all?
No.
Okay. No, it's okay. No, it's just curious. So that is, they do deserve to be paid a lot more, as does everybody here. But that's also just something I wanted to remind us about. That
I think what you were, and I'm sorry, I was a little distracted. I think what you're referring to was a one-time pilot program for Mesa for the bus drivers. They're included in the job fair.
Right.
Statewide, from a state organization?
Yeah,
DES
I could be incorrect, but my understanding from our superintendent is that pilot program was in fact pretty successful, and that the DES was anticipating looking into expanding it to other districts in our state. So to move it out of kind of the pilot phase, to either grow their pilot phase or to maybe make it a more solid thing. So that's, I just want to put that out there. But again, of course, all these individuals certainly deserve better pay for the great work they do. With the question about the capital shifting, moving the 2.7 million into capital, so is the idea there that we're moving into capital to essentially pay for either projects that we already anticipate or new projects that we didn't have funding for, and then the following year, because we've increased it by 2.7 million essentially, then take 2.7 million or some amount out of the next allotment we get back into M&O?
Yeah.
That's the purpose
It's
there.
complex. I mean, we set it aside this year into capital.
Mhm.
Because we can't get it spent before June 30th, it has a then carry forward in capital for 2021. We bring it out of capital at that point. Well, we go ahead and use it at that point for technology and for textbook adoption. When we get to 21-22 then, we bring it back out of capital, move it into M&O, and that helps the 21-22. We have to remember, what's hard to understand with this subject is we have used a part of the ADM, part of that 477, to create capital.
Right.
We could have just as easily created M&O, but that just increases our budget balance carry forward, and it seemed like, why would we do that when we could actually next year balance the budget with what you've seen and get the benefit of, for at least 1 year, increased technology and textbooks. Two areas that we think we need some help in. And so, but then it's a 1 year only.
Right.
But it's got a large infusion of money. I mean, textbooks with what's already in capital, and this 2.7 million, we'll have over $4 million next year when you see the capital budget that will be devoted solely to textbook adoptions, and that's the two areas that Dr. Guerin mentioned.
Okay, and then with the end of the 2020 plan, the only increasing factors are the TEI and then inflation. That's it then, unless the government decides to increase funding. So if we have losses, but we're projecting relatively stable general budget limits because of those factors, then the issue will eventually become, I'm guessing, just on how things are looking now, how we increase salaries year over year, if that can even be done.
You followed it very well. The expectation that staff is going to have, especially teachers, coming off of the governor's plan is going to be there.
Right.
Okay? And you're not going to have his money any longer to satisfy that kind of expectation. So that's why in 21-22, you have to have a plan of using local money to try to supplement what isn't there anymore. And that's what this plan is doing. So it's spending on capital, but then when it knows when 21-22 gets here, he's not giving you $3 million any longer. we're going to use that capital money then to try to replace some of what he's sent in, but probably not all of it. But without, as you'll see in this 3-year projection on the final PowerPoint, if we don't do something like that, the funding falls off so dramatically without his infusion of salary money that the staff expectation will be there, and there'll be no option for the board to be able to support the level of which they've been used to for the last 3 years.
The other source of income to each of those years, of course, is to do what we did this year and beat the projection on enrollment.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I believe we would all like
Yeah.
to
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for that. I hope that since the SEA leadership is here, just that they're aware of that as well. So thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Quite welcome.
Board Member Kravitz.
I don't want to count my chickens before they hatch, but there's talk that it was in the governor's State of the State address that he's talking of restoring district additional assistance.
That's the one I mentioned.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was looking.
That's that $3 million that you're going to see at the next meeting when we show you the capital budget. We would have normally showed you $10 million. We're now going to be showing you 13. That's the restoration that we had not planned on, that he does have in his budget, and his budget usually gets mostly approved, so we're planning on using that money.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay, I'm sorry,
Yep.
I was looking at numbers and my eyes.
Understand, I mean, we got a lot of things in motion here.
So, okay, so that's been accounted for in our budget.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
It has.
thank you.
Board Member Perleberg.
Thank you. Okay, so quick questions. Can you please remind me how long 301 has been extended?
To 2041,
Okay, all right,
I think. I'm close.
okay.
20 years from 2021. So yeah, 2041 would be the sunset date on 301.
Okay, and it's still the 0.6, correct?
6 tenths of one.
6 cents of,
one,
for every dollar, 0.06,
yes.
yeah. Okay, thank you for that. And then going back to the state funding, so the 5% state-provided teacher salary adjustment, the 3.1 million. Obviously, like you said earlier, this is for certain employees, certain educator, teachers, classroom, coded 001, I believe. So how are we balancing that with the amount that you gave for the 5%? You have the total matching benefits increased to all staff. Now, does that mean all classified staff, all certified, all administrators, everything, right?
It includes
so that
all staff.
6.4 million is that in addition to that 3.1,
No.
or is that 3.1's in there?
Of that 6 million, 3 million of it is his money devoted to teachers. The
Okay.
rest of it is local money
Is-
devoted to the 1 million that, how he calculates it, as I talked about earlier, and all of the rest of the staff.
Right. So
The 3 million is
then-
a part of the
So
6.
then the district then, for all staff members to get 5%, we have to budget that basically 3.3 million out of our budget to keep it even. Okay, I just want clarity for that.
Sure.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Members of the board, one thing I hope this doesn't come about, but his current funding picture has, of the 5%, 3.5% is M&O and 1.5% is 301. That's because 301 is flush with money because of the sales tax in the economy. But it removes then 1.5% of that 5 from the base. It does not get inflation any longer. And we now are dealing with 2 funding sources to complete his 2020 plan, if that were to hold true. Hopefully, many of us are talking to legislators about, let's don't do that to ourselves. Just as the first 10 and then the second 5 and now the last 5, let's just make it all M&O so that we're not constantly saying to staff, remember of your last salary increase, 1.5% is based upon what happens with the economy. So, you really don't want to confuse things by going through that if you can help it, nor from an accounting standpoint do we want to try to use 2 funds to,
Right.
pay base salaries. So, but that's part of what he has proposed, and that's to preserve general fund monies to the extent of that 1.5% for use, I suspicion, in other ways. So just so you're aware, hopefully legislation will change it, but we don't know for sure.
Mr. Gadd, quick question. I wanted to point out and make sure, I'm sure everybody saw this, but that the insurance, there's no increased cost to the insurance again, and we're projecting that forward, which I'm sure you'll show in your next presentation, and that's somewhere around 5 to 6% typically?
That's what healthcare has been running. But
Right.
remember, there's an increase,
Mhm.
but that increase is entirely payable from the trust fund.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that goes to my next point. I do appreciate you pointing out that we're going to have an analysis of those cash-controlled funds again, including the
ma'am.
medical.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Board Member Greenberg?
Board Member Perlberg actually kind of jogged something in my memory. So that, the 5% for all staff, that includes administrative staff as well. Have we, awkward question to ask, have we done an analysis of our administrative staff pay compared to other districts and what that looks like, and whether that, I mean, honestly, it's just insulting. How
No,
we're
it's not-
funded.
not at all.
No,
So-
how the state funds us. I mean,
Right.
people, we should be paying people their fair market wages. But yeah, is that 5%
So-
applicable to everybody?
So the little bit of history in 1819, 2018, 2019, I'm not going back to, I'm not quite going back to 18. We gave the administrative staff a 1% raise, where teachers received 10% and classified received 4%. And that's because we felt that there were disparities that needed to be studied and rectified. They said, okay. I don't think that was easy for them, but so then last year we gave raises. We gave a minimum of 5%. Most administrators got 5%, as the rest of the employees did. A few got a little more than that, 7, I think as much as 8%, to make up some disparities. And part of the making up of the disparities was a comparative study with neighboring districts that we compete with, especially in terms of assistant principals' pay that was done. So in the last 2 years, where teachers received 15%, classified received 9%, administrators made most of them 6%, and some maybe as much as 8 or 9% if they were in that make up the disparities. But that was done based on the study that our HR department did with neighboring districts.
Okay, and so that, and is my understanding correct that other districts intend to do the 5% across the board as well this year too?
They have the first 2 years in terms of 10. Some of them did the full 10 for all employees. But so we expect them to do the same as people, as other districts go through their budget process and meeting with their employee groups. We won't know the full results of what they do until they complete their processes, but we'll be watching and talking to them in the meantime.
Okay, thank you.
Madam President, we have one more PowerPoint. Madam Vice President, we have one more PowerPoint to go. If I can get that up here, we'll do it. There it is. So what we've shared with you tonight then is our recommendations on revising the current year budget when May comes, our projection of next year's 2021 budget, and then this 3-year projection, and it's obviously out a ways and it makes some assumptions, but the 3-year projection is here primarily to show you what occurs when the 2020 plan has completed. And where do you go from there? So, some assumptions. We assume the inflation rate stays the same. We assume the 275 loss that we've predicted for 2021 stays the same. The state has ended its 2021 teacher compensation increase. There's no legislative changes to the funding formula that would be detrimental. Additional funds from Prop 123 end in fiscal 24-25. That's something that everybody will become concerned with as you get closer to that date. It's like Prop 301. The 5-year employee trust projections indicate no increase in district contribution for insurance. So, and I think that trust is healthy. I think it's fine. I do think that after you get out a ways, in 3, 4, 5 years out, you're going to have to take a look at that. The increase absorbed by the trust for 2021 is estimated at $1 million. That's the 5% increase, Ms. Beckham, that you talked about. Is being paid by the trust. A continuation of unfilled positions will generate large carry forwards, and that will depend solely on the economy. If the economy is good, we have difficulty in filling positions, especially classified positions. If the economy is bad, we will have lots of people who want to fill positions, and that carryover will be affected downward accordingly. We're going to continue the use of the $2 million cash control funds, but we're also going to increase its use, as you will see in just a moment. And that the TEI, the Teacher Experience Index, doesn't change from what it currently is. It yields about $3 million, so that's the seniority part of teacher compensation. Okay, the projection. You can see for 1920 we have a result of the formula of 125. It moves up to 2021 to 130 because a lot of that $5 million differential is that amount of money from the 2020 plan. And then as in 21, 22, and 22, 23, it goes very flat. It assumes inflation, but then also continues the 275 ADM drop. So you're offsetting much of that inflation that you normally would get by having less students to multiply by, to the tune of about $6,000 a student. So you're in the $1.5 million range of what the loss would be if you used that projection. So it gets a little more detailed, I think, when you see this one. This is the general budget limit. It's the formula. And as you move across, you can see a large increase. It's the $8 million we just talked about from 1920 to 2021. But then it goes very flat. And there's almost no increase in 21-22 and 22-23 because you don't have the advantage of the 2020 plan any longer. You have exhausted the assignment of what you have put into capital. That's now basically in the base in M&O to fund salary increases, etc. You have lost the advantage of that increase in Prop 123, that's at $500,000. So it really puts you back into the position of having only two factors that significantly influence what you have to spend in 21-22 and 22-23, inflation, but that's offset somewhat by ADM loss. So you basically are very flat. And that's the issue, is that you have needs and you want to do things and you're flat with the money, and so it makes it difficult to do that. So if you looked at it in a bit of a different way, you remember seeing the $8 million for 2021. It drops to $1.4 million in 21-22 and $1.1 million in 22-23. That's straight out of the formula. So that doesn't hardly give you any money to work with when you consider our salary base as large as it is. So we've now brought in, as you can see, an additional $2 million each year of additional cash control funding. Currently $1 million. It rises to $6 million because the amount in 21-22 is an add of $2 million and again another add of $2 million in 22-23. So now those cash control funds, the rentals, the Medicaids, that whole scenario now is up to a $6 million annual draw. It's getting fairly significant now. Those funds had quite a bit of money in them, and I wouldn't put this projection up here if I didn't think it was doable. But it's to the point where you've probably now starting to exhaust your ability to use cash control funds, once that $6 million annual obligation is there and it continues on, you're going to be hard-pressed, I think, to get above that number comfortably, and so it is what it is. If you take then the amount that we get from the formula and you take an additional $2 million of cash control funds, in 21-22 you have $3.4 million in which to allocate to whatever the board chooses to allocate it to. It's far different than 8.4. And then when you get to 22-23, you're again flat with roughly $3 million. So when you get through all of that, if you assumed program increases in 21-22 and 22-23 of $1 million, and maybe that's high, I don't know. We did put in some reduction in staff. We are assuming that if we have continued to drop in ADM, we must be at the point of reducing FTE. And in this particular case, we made the assumption of teachers because that's obviously directly proportional to the ADM laws. So we took $1.5 million as a reduction in 21-22 of teaching positions. That's 20 teachers. We took another reduction of 10 in 22-23 because, again, if that enrollment decline at that 275 level is continuing, by that point we must have arrived at the point of being able to subtract some teachers and still maintain very attractive class sizes, just because we haven't done any of that as we've declined over the past several years. So then, if you assume that, you raise 21-22 up to $4 million. You still in 22-23 only have $2 million, so you're certainly nowhere close to the position that you had in 2021, which is back to that $8 million. So, what are the conclusions from this projection? One is our ability to stay competitive with other districts and in the formula is definitely hampered because of declining ADM. That's pretty obvious, I think. Retention and recruitment, if we cannot maintain salary schedule growth as other districts might be able to, then retention and recruitment we believe will be affected by that. Any additional spending you're going to need to prioritize because you just don't have the latitude of having large infusions of money. I mean, you're going to have to be very methodical and very careful about what you decide to add to the budget. State retirement is expected to increase. It will. There is an actuarially, projection as required. That will go beyond 13 without any difficulty. Could even hit 14. Contracted cleaners is going to have some increase again because of lower wages and that advancement, and then the school resource officers. The 275 is predicted each of these years. It may be optimistic. I mean, if this comes back at, instead of 275, it comes back at 400 or 500, then we've got a much gloomier picture than what is being shown here. Current cash projections are possible, but do not recommend exceeding projections that would increase the amount needed to move back to M&O. What the effect is going to be of those cash control funds, if you don't be very careful with what you do there, remember you're taking positions from M&O and you're now paying them from a cash control fund, especially custodians out of Civic Center, rentals, etc. At some point in time, if that fund starts to become exhausted, you're going to have to pick up those custodians, move them back to M&O, so that will be an increase. You had a reduction. Now you have an increase because unless you revise the cleaning standard a whole lot, you don't need them. You're going to have an increase in staff as they come back out of those cash control funds because they can't support an ongoing $6 million every year. And then fiscal year 21-22 represents optimistic an approximate 2% salary increase for all staff without budget negotiations. So we're saying here overall, if you look at what we've just talked about, the teachers reduction, the inflation factor, the ADM loss, we come out of here with about a 2% availability, all of which you would spend on salary improvement, and that's as good as it gets. So that's a big difference from where we were with the 2020 plan. And that's why this is here, so that you understand that while we have some some optimism for next year. And I mean, it's obviously very good because you have things going for you. As time goes on, then some of that optimism needs to decrease. If the economy goes south and 301 gets affected and other things, that inflation factor goes down, it gets even bleaker. So whatever that date is, it's going to happen. It always does. The question is, how far out is that recession that we had back in '08? How far out is it this time? And so that's the 3-year projection. And I think I've got the message across, and see what happens.
Mr. Gadd, first of all, a statement. I think we can see on page 4 that, again, we owe our community a huge thank you for passing that override. A 3-year projection like this really shows us the gravity of the situation and how those funds were truly needed. Secondly, I don't recall. I know your projection on our enrollment loss obviously is somewhat in the middle, conservative for what we had the previous year. Do you recall what the study said for the next 3 years, by chance? I could look it up.
I only recall, I think I have it with me, and I can look that up, but I recall for next year, it's 329 roughly. I'm suspicioning that it's fairly flat at that 300 or so, 300 to 400 range, because what you have, as the board knows, those lower grade levels have a lot fewer students in them than does the high school grade levels. And so as those students leave, if you can't improve the number of elementary students at the primary level especially, you're going to have whatever that decrease is. And I can probably look for it.
I could be wrong, but I thought it was a 10-year projection of somewhere in the neighborhood of a loss of like 2,000. So
let me take a look.
You don't need to do that for me right now. I just was curious.
Okay. Any other questions? I understand that, there's a lot of moving parts up here, and we've made a lot of assumptions, and we'll be going back over this at least 2 more times, maybe 3. But we wanted to give you an early projection of where we think things are. I mean, they're okay for next year. They're fine for next year. Everybody's happy, and it's after 2021, unless something doesn't happen legislatively or with the governor's budget, things don't get very rosy after that.
Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Gadd.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Dr. Picard, do you want to introduce our next discussion item?
So the next discussion item is that of the possible position of internal auditor. This has been a request by Board Member Greenberg to put on the board agenda for discussion first and possible action at a later board meeting, depending on how this goes. I would thank Board Member Greenberg for background information that he has sent us. We have also included in the board packet policy DIE and the regulation that goes with it, which is audit and financial monitoring that addresses the internal auditor position. We've also included in the packet the job description from the past of an internal auditor, somewhat updated in terms of the knowledge area to reflect current software packages that an auditor would need to have some knowledge of or familiarity with. But with that, I would like to, since this is Board Member Greenberg's request, ask Board Member Greenberg to begin the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Creekard. And I would like to thank you and President Beckham and Vice President Beckman for making sure that this was placed on the agenda for discussion. As I said at the last board meeting, I do think transparency is important, and especially where issues of significance or public interest can be found, I think it is useful for the governing board to share its views and provide some direction and guidance. I also think, just briefly with policy DIE, which specifically requires us to form an internal auditing department, I do think it's important that, we either have policies on the books that we enforce and follow, or we remove those policies from the books, because our policies are an important way for the community, teachers, staff, administrators to see what it is that we're doing, and consistency in our application of those policies is very important to give people fair notice of how we handle situations. With that, I'll move a bit into this discussion, and then we can probably open it up. To recap, last week, at the insistence of President Beckham and Dr. Creekard, we had a phone call, which was, I thought, very productive, and we discussed what is it that we're specifically looking for in an internal auditor, what is it that I was looking for, because there was some confusion about what that position really meant and its impact on a district like ours and districts across the state. And as Dr. Creekard mentioned, I very quickly put together just a very rough number of resources, some articles and online resources concerning internal auditing in public school districts, and some examples from across the nation at both private universities. I tried to include all of our alma maters as an example, but also as well public school districts across the United States. A very good example being Los Angeles Unified School District, which does have a significant number of more students and a lot better funding than we do, but still sets an example of the things that we could strive to achieve. President Beckham mentioned that, sorry, very confusing. President Beckham mentioned that there was confusion over what internal auditing does versus external auditing, because this position had somewhat existed in the past, and it wasn't quite clear what its impact or value add was, especially because it wasn't clear to people what they did. And so I did try to provide in my materials, which I hope board members had some chance to look through, the difference between the two. As a matter of, I believe, federal law and state law, our district is required to do an external audit, correct? Mm-hmm. We have an external auditor that we receive funding for, and we pay for that. Financial, correct. And that is what the standard definition of an external audit is. An external audit is where an independent third party comes in, conducts testing of the financial statements that you have put together, and expresses an opinion as to whether those financial statements present a fair and accurate view of your organization's financial health and statements. And that's exactly what we have. We have them come in, they explain whether they found any issues, reporting issues, and then that gets reported to the state. And our state government does allot some funding to public schools to pay for that. I think SUSD gets $54,000 or something like that. It's not a lot, but it varies. By contrast, an internal auditor serves a very different role, sometimes overlapping with that of the external auditor, but the internal audit function is actually quite different. An internal audit function, their job is to provide an independent assurance that an organization's risk management, governance, and internal control processes are operating effectively and are doing what they're supposed to do. Our district, just like many districts across the United States and other districts in Arizona, often falls into trouble in this area. We had the past few years our issues with improper internal controls, improper processes, whether that was in the HR department, finance department, or elsewhere. These things happen, but the purpose of an internal auditor and an inspector general is to review these things, recommend changes, improve efficiency, and hopefully put in stopgaps and different procedures to help prevent these events from ever occurring again. Nothing is 100% effective. People can always break the rules, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try our best to help our staff members, help our administrators, help our teachers do the best they can to follow the rules, have good processes in place, and ultimately, and something that's very important about internal auditing, make things more efficient. If they make things more efficient, that's more dollars that can go into our classrooms, more dollars that can go to our teachers, and really improve the opportunities we have for all of our students. I think Los Angeles Unified School District's Office of the Inspector General makes a very good point that frankly, they do save a lot of money for their district, and they are able to put it to good use in all sorts of programs, from special education to new curriculum to new teachers, improving teacher pay, to awards and everything like that. So that is the job of the Inspector General, of internal auditor. And these things include, their actions include evaluating internal controls and advising on improvements, evaluating risks and advising on ways to handle them, analyzing operations and confirming information, and working constructively with our external auditors and any other individuals we may hire to help improve our systems here and improve the trust and transparency of our organization. I won't read it now just because there is, I won't read the full thing now, but LAUSD makes a very good point in their About section. They say that independence is extremely important because there's a natural tendency for managers and supervisors to be protective of the programs that they administer. In some cases, the discovery of waste, mismanagement, or wrongdoing may reflect on the manager personally. Even if the manager is not implicated, revelations of waste or wrongdoing may reflect adversely on the program involved by undercutting the support of the Board of Education, superintendent, and public. Under these circumstances, managers and supervisors do not always identify or come forward with evidence of failings in the programs they administer. For that reason, the responsibility for auditing and investigating must be assigned to individuals with clear and unrestricted independence from district managers. Hundreds of professional audits and investigations are completed by the OIG have resulted in saving the district millions of dollars, which is redirected to students in the classroom. Additionally, the OIG is responsible for suggesting and directing major reforms to the district's infrastructure, including procurement process, human resources, and the like. I think that's a really good example of why this is important, because people make mistakes. Sometimes, at best, they're innocent mistakes. At worst, they're intentional deviations from the law and others. But by allowing and creating a pathway for people to submit concerns to an independent party that they know will review this and is not somebody who has an interest in ensuring that it is blocked or covered up, is a really great way to build trust in our district. I will conclude with pointing out a couple things. I spitballed a few suggestions on our phone call last week. We recognize that funding is tight, and our state does not fund us well enough perhaps to do all the things that we want. And we want things like more counselors. We want things like better pay for our teachers. We want things like newer curriculum for our students. And it's very difficult to prioritize these things. And while my own view is that internal auditing, based on the research, can pay for itself, although being an initial expense up front, I do think it would be useful. And what that led me to was kind of three, as I said, rough ideas. One might be that we seek to hire a specialist in this area who can, instead of developing an entire department, could instead coordinate with external internal auditors. Internal audits can be conducted by people outside the organization, by vendors, much like the external audit is done. And I believe we actually have an example that was provided to us, Mr. Gadd, from the telephone systems, right? And it's good to have somebody who's independent, who understands this, who can interview people, identify the key priorities for such internal audits to make sure that they are cost effective in hiring that. So one option, perhaps, is to hire one person who specializes in that to serve as a coordinator and supervisor for these types of things. The other option, as policy DIE requires, is that we develop our own internal auditing department. But, of course, while that is something I would love, I do respect that that could be quite an expense, because in order to hire people qualified in that area who know what they're doing, especially in a public governance structure, could be quite expensive, and that's something that we have to balance with our other priorities. The third idea, which I kind of came up with while sitting in the airport, flying to a meeting, was that perhaps we do maybe a combo where we maybe start with hiring a specialist, but perhaps speak to other districts around our area and see if maybe they would like to enter into an intergovernmental agreement to form an internal auditing department and inspector general like they have at LAUSD. This would probably be overall the biggest benefit because we can pool our resources and get more than what we could individually pay for. I will note that the one issue is that all of our departments are different, right? So Paradise Valley Unified School District has a separate and distinct procurements department than SUSD's. So it might be a hiccup to internal auditing, but I'm sure that there are ways of still making a very effective and useful system for our district and our students and our teachers, and really make sure that we're protecting the taxpayer, protecting our students, and trying to put as much money into the classrooms as possible. So I know that was a lot of information. Sorry that I took up so much time, but thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Board Member Greenberg. Do I have any comments or questions from other board members? No? Okay, I do appreciate that because like you, I agree. Another set of eyes, et cetera, is always helpful. I did review some of the attachments, and interesting to note, we've had the luxury of having a fantastic experienced superintendent and CFO. So while I acknowledge when you have or a team as experienced as that, things might go very smoothly. But in our environment right now, in the educational environment, I, for one, am always in support of helping our systems, best practices, and fiscal responsibility to a point that the end game is to make the process better and more transparent. When I read the DIER policy, it says internal audit is dedicated to assisting district administration in the effective discharge of its responsibilities. And to this end, it furnishes them with analysis, appraisals, counsel, recommendations, and information concerning the activities to be reviewed. So while I wouldn't ever want someone that was here just to try and look for things, the assisting part to me is critical. Some of the information you all provided, for instance, the one from Tucson Unified, I think is to me, it looks like it would be something that was appropriate. Their summary says that it examines and evaluates the adequacy and the effectiveness of management control systems practiced by the district to ensure compliance with local, state, and federal rules for financial reporting. And it reports to the governing board and quorum and the superintendent for administrative purposes. So my thought process is for consideration, this is what I would be looking for. Any other comments? Board Member Perleberg.
Well, I just simply at this time would like to ask Dr. Creekard and Mr. Gadd as far as what we do currently have in place within our systems. I mean, obviously we have a lot of different departments, and where you feel, let's say, our strengths are right now in these departments and in these functions.
Okay, thank you, Member Perleberg and board members. I appreciate the comments from Vice President Beckman. I honestly believe that what the district went through for a couple of years ago, resulting in Attorney General lawsuit against us as well as indictments, is an anomaly in school districts in the state, and certainly in our school district. We have a great need to continue to be transparent and to continue to be in compliance, and that is the commitment when you hire people with that kind of experience in their resume. One of the issues of the materials that Board Member Greenberg gave us was that, and he admits, is larger school districts. So part of the reality is that as the districts become smaller, people begin to double up on duties. You don't have enough money to have a person to do everything that an LA Unified District has, with probably a couple 100,000 students, or the district in Texas that you mentioned, and Seattle, that are both over 50,000 students, so more than twice our size. And so we always have to keep an eye on our percentage of money spent in the area of instruction as opposed to the area of administration. And that's something that honestly I believe as a district we still have some work to do to bring that into the right margin. So what we do now is if something comes to our attention through the daily workings, we say, oh, we need to take a look at that. So either we do that internally with our people, or as was mentioned, we hire somebody who has the expertise in that area. So we needed help. We wanted to look at our phone systems and are we spending that money correctly? Are we making the right purchase? Do we have the right agreements with vendors, et cetera? And so we hired somebody who understands that business. We could not afford to have somebody who has expertise in transportation, another who has expertise in IT, another has expertise in purchasing, another has expertise in special education. We have hired those people, and they are our directors, and who are supervised then by assistant superintendents who have supervised those areas in one form or another through their career. So what we currently do is we watch our administrative costs, we use contracts that are specific to that area. The idea of an IGA with another district or two is an interesting one, and that is something that could be explored with other people. That it's innovative enough that it's only been done in the through the work of the various self-insurance trusts in the state, and where there are insurance trusts that employ people in these various areas that come in and work with your district. So we could look at it from the standpoint of what our trust does, what our and be willing to talk to other districts to see if there's some kind of need for that. But I think, as direct as I can to your question, I think what we do is monitor internally, pay attention to our external audit each year and issues that they may bring, and then thirdly, when we feel that there's an issue we need to look at, we hire somebody with that expertise to come in and give us a look at that. Mr. Gadd?
In my experience, and I've supervised more than one internal auditor, they are very good at the financial auditing piece. Their CPA, that's what they want to do, and that's what they've been trained to do. That's one function that they can perform, and a valuable one. But the other one is you're looking constantly at the district's overall operations, and they don't have an expertise, just as Dr. Picard said, in maintenance or in transportation or any of those. And the catch-up for those folk coming from the private sector is fairly significant. So I believe that financially with Heinfeld and Meach, et cetera, I think that we're doing a very good job with the financial management of this district. Obviously, it was not good previously, and it required a lot of effort, and we put that into it. And I believe now, when you see the next audit, which will be coming forth in a month or so, you'll find that it's a good audit. I mean, it's one where we have complied with almost everything I can think of. I would rather use that money, if it were me, to see if we could achieve some savings by hiring external people when we thought that there was an area that needed attention. You have to get someone, some of those areas are very complex, governed by lots of statutes and rules and regulations, et cetera. Software, you couldn't probably expect realistically someone as broad, that would be as broad as that in order to be able to assign them to some of these things. So I think you should go after what you need and where you need it is a better use of the resources than not. That's my take on it.
Board Member Greenberg.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, first of all, I want to piggyback on Vice President Beckman, one, this is not at all, this is something I had raised well before any of you were here. This is not, and it has anything to do with any of your competency, and we are very lucky to have you both, and the development of your team doing such a great job with our finances. I mean, no one, as I said last time, no one has ever come to me since you have been here with any sorts of complaints about financial wrongdoing or anything like that. And of course, I would have raised it at that time to the appropriate channel. So it has nothing to do with that. And I do understand, somehow these other districts manage to develop these things. And it's either because they're double the size of SUSD, or they have a lot more money than SUSD. Somehow, though, they do hire and find these people capable of performing these internal audits for them. And that's why I did point to LAUSD's. One, because the reason I choose LAUSD is not because I think LAUSD does everything perfectly. It's because it just so happens their website has a lot of materials on it to give examples of what, how we would be measuring someone's success in this field, the type of work that they do on the broad spectrum. I would agree probably in the state of Arizona, it would be very difficult to develop our own department. Unfortunately, I say that because it is something I passionately believe in, which is why I recommended, more or less either maybe looking at the IGAs or these trusts that Dr. Creekard mentioned, or hiring someone who, yes, they have CPA backgrounds is very common, and that's their knowledge, but internal auditors tend to be specifically trained in the ability to identify those priority areas through their interview processes with administrators and the like. I think it's it's not, I don't think it's as simple as saying that things are right now. I think the board vice president and I have experienced certain things that have come up that we've had to deal with. I will say my own personal my own personal view, for example, I submitted an open meeting law complaint, as people know. The district was notified about that in the first week of July, and it took over 3.5 months to hand over 2 MP3 files to the Attorney General's office. I mean, these things to me come off very strange. They do not seem to follow logic. And to be clear, that is not something that was caused by anyone in this room. This was actually caused by somebody we appointed outside of our district to deal with, who frankly I do not believe has the right to be dealing with that issue, but that's a separate issue. So the reason why you have an inspector general or internal auditor is to be able to allow employees to whistleblow, essentially, or to submit complaints to somebody who doesn't have a vested interest in trying to protect me or any teachers or an administrator or anything like that. It's somebody separate and apart whose only job it really is to review these things, improve efficiency, review complaints that people have, determine if they're legitimate or not. And the point, the aim is ultimately to create these channels and to create these efficiencies to benefit everybody. It's very difficult. It is very, I will say personally, in my own experience of the past year and a month, because it's almost been another month, that there are things that I have raised that are very curious to me, and the board vice president knows that, of why we are either taking certain positions that seem to be contrary to what we know, or just very long and bizarre delays on events, and that immediately raises my suspicion. Why is this taking so long? So, it's not a criticism of anyone in this room. It's a statement that, what we heard from Ms. Treon today is not an uncommon view. I was at an event about 2 weeks ago with a significant body of district community members. I did not speak at this. I was just there for a good time, where this was a focal point of their discussion. Not internal auditing, but the trust issue and the issues of the past. And I can't say it's that uncommon. I mean, we've seen in other districts with cases that the AGs pursued. We saw it in our district, 20 years ago or 16 years ago at the time? I mean, it happens, and it happens exactly because of what you say. We double up on things. We don't create an independent channel to handle this. And then all of a sudden, people are going, exactly what LAUSD said. Oh, there's this problem. I'm so busy. It was just a simple mistake, but if I bring it up, it could become bigger, so I don't want to report on it. And then it just tumbleweeds. So it's not about that things are going well now, because they are, I think, largely on the whole, but there has to be some there has to be something. I mean, board members, from what I was told, received complaints about our former superintendent, and their only way of dealing with it was to submit it to our superintendent. I mean, which is ridiculous. And to our board members' credit, because what else are they supposed to do? There's nobody to talk to about these issues. So I think it would go a long way to look into this. At a minimum, someone who specializes in organizing these functions, but also can deal with the investigative side of things. I know what I would want to have. I know that isn't probably possible. I admit that, but there has to be something. I mean, our attorney works very hard on a million things. She can't also do risk management and risk assessment and advising. It's just not possible. So there's got to be something. It would be my point on this issue. I don't know how else to put it other than plainly like that. I mean, there's just got to be something, because people constantly hounding the AG's office. The AG's office is just as overworked and underpaid as we are, So they've got a million different criminal cases and issues going on, and if it takes that long to deal with an issue and it gets to that level, the news is going to know about it. It distracts from our mission. I mean, how much time did we waste dealing with these issues the past 3 years that could have been focused on working with our teachers and improving education in our schools? Because HR mistakes happen. We hired somebody who was bad. It's that simple. We made a mistake. That's okay. But sometimes the effects of that mistake can be very significant if we don't have somebody who's able to independently review them and decide what to do about it.
Okay, thanks, Board Member Greenberg. Board Member Kravitz.
I had emailed and asked for any reports that we had on file from our previous two that I know of, internal auditor. I know the first one was hired in, I believe, prior to March 18, 2008. I know the time board member Schild was very instrumental in hiring him, or getting that through. I just was wondering, did you find anything?
We found no reports. We found one document of an internal auditor's goals for the year, but as I've said before, my cupboards were pretty bare, but as we looked through the business office, and Mrs. Como checked her things where she archives reports and so forth, and we found nothing from either internal auditor.
Okay, I think, this discussion is basically two sides of the same coin. We all want to improve efficiencies and best practices. My concern is I don't know what will be different. The only thing I was able to find was on Board Book from June 2nd of 2009. It was a report, or PowerPoint by Kevin Price, and it talked about areas to be strengthened, district actions, and special education review. I'll be happy to pass this down to you, Dr. Krieghardt. I don't know that any of his recommendations were enacted. It doesn't, from my experience, well, now, this is 11 years ago, not much changed. I was down at the auditor, I went down to the auditor's, state auditor's office several years ago. I think this was probably when we had our second auditor, who was hired by Dr. Peterson in August of 2012, and yet we still weren't reporting properly to the state. I appreciate Mr. Gadd's comments. I think we'd be better off hiring experts outside the field, that are people that are experts within the fields and the departments that we want to have do a deeper dive in to see where we can, again, create efficiencies and implement best practices for continuous improvement. I appreciate the examples that you gave us, Mr. Greenberg, but I feel like they're almost apples to oranges comparisons because they're such large districts. LA Unified has over 600,000 students. I saw one post that said 600,000 plus, and or another one that said 734,641 students, and a budget of over $7 billion. Seattle Public Schools with 53,627 students has a budget of over $1 billion, if the information I was looking at was correct. Clearly, they have more places to hide. I agree with you. We need, efficiencies. It's just a matter of, how do we tackle this situation? I believe that Mr. Gadd has expressed a good way to resolve this just because of my past experiences with internal auditors. I don't know that will solve our issue. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Gadd, I have a quick question, or Dr. Creekard. Where, if you were to go outside and have specific areas, where is the governing board's role in that? Because when I read this policy, and it says internal audit functions under policies and regulations adopted by the governing board. It reports on a routine basis to the superintendent or the superintendent's designee. Internal audit coordinates activities with the state and federal and outside, but it says, most importantly, that the governing board shall have sole responsibility for the hiring and evaluating of the internal auditor, and essentially the internal auditor will report administratively to the superintendent and functionally to the governing board. So my question to you then is, if you were to look at areas, or our new CFO, as we hire a CFO, was to look at areas that they felt were needed, where are we in that? Where do we have a voice in the areas that we feel need to be looked into?
Madam President, normally anything that would require significant implementation of change will require the governing board's not only knowledge but approval. For an example, you know that we're in the midst now of an audit relative to solar. Okay? And that's a significant item. That's one where an external engineer is almost required. I don't think you could do it any other way. But then that's the subject of an executive session that I think is coming up, and it would be the subject of board action relative to contracts that we have with solar firms. So almost all of these changes that might come about through efficiency and so forth, either Dr. Creekard will let the board know in an informational memo about those, or you'll be asked to take action publicly to implement whatever the change is because of the nature of what it is. Contracts that need to be revised that were previously approved by the board, things like that. So most of the major ones are going to require board action of some sort to legally change whatever the obligation may have been. Maybe it affects a lot of people, and if that's the case, obviously we would want you to know that we're going to eliminate the central warehouse and we're going to do a different process of how we deliver supplies and so forth. That's affecting 6, 7, 8 people. We obviously would bring that to you as a reorganization of that department. So I mean, that's the board, in anything that's significant, the board would have a role to play.
Yes, and I guess my concern is it seems like we're over here. On the one side, you hire an internal auditor, and they look through and they assist, etc. On the other hand, you're saying that we go outside, and the CFO and the superintendent typically would identify areas that they felt needed to be looked into. primarily for best practices or for efficiencies? Or
Both efficiencies
Okay.
primarily, because the district's going to have budget problems.
Right.
Everybody does, given, what we've talked about here. And so you're going to look for ways in which to economize in areas that doesn't impact the classroom. That means that you're going to be talking to other districts, et cetera, about what have you done with trying to effectuate efficiencies, et cetera. Once 2 or 3 of those are identified, you're going to want to try to pursue those. And the way to pursue those is probably ask them, who did the study for you? What was the result? Can you send me a copy of it? That's the same person that you likely might invite in. For an example, let's say that someone comes along and says, we need, all of our classification system for classified employees seems out of whack. Responsibility versus pay. That's not something I don't think we can do internally, just the magnitude of it. So you're going to bring in a consultant, and the consultant may very well recommend to you that there's some positions that you could, you could lessen the salary, you could freeze the salary, whatever. Those kinds of things are, an internal auditor would have a tough time dealing with that, I think, versus a consultant in HR who does that 100% for a living. So those are some examples of why I think when you've identified areas or others have suggested things to you, it's easier to, it's more productive to go to someone who's got that expertise and bring them in, and then the assignment would be done in a relatively short order. The internal auditor the audit we have now is fairly extensive by an independent third-party CPA firm, as you all know, that's required.
That's the Heinfield Meach.
That's the Heinfield Meach. They do procurement, they do finances, they do a whole host, fixed assets, a whole host of things. And if they discover something then that we're not doing correctly, we obviously can take advantage of that. So we're going to learn about things that we need to do differently, both through a $50,000 plus internal audit conducted by a CPA firm, and others, other districts, other ways that would feed information to us, especially where we're on the quest to find savings, because financially we want to avoid cuts to the classroom.
And to be clear, just like the rest of us have said tonight, I'm in support of looking in a direction that creates the transparency I think we're all looking for and the best practices. To your point, I would need to hear more about a collaborative effort between the board's concerns and where the district felt, i.e. the new CFO or a new CFO and the superintendent, how that process would work to where we felt that it was a collaborative effort as far as areas that needed to be audited.
Well, and I think from a goal standpoint, that's one opportunity, right, that the board has to assign some goals when you feel that something needs to be reviewed. That's an automatic. And I would think that you would put whatever concern has been raised by individual board members on the agenda. And if there's enough interest, then we would be directed administratively to pursue that in terms of an audit, which we would be happy to do, bring that audit result back to the board. So I think that's the way, you communicate with us things that you may have heard that we're not aware of.
Board Member Greenberg?
I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but regarding our previous internal auditor, I don't know about our previous internal auditors. It seems to me that our previous internal auditors did not do a particularly good job. I don't know who they are. It is odd to me that there are no reports that is indicative as compared to the examples I provided of somebody who either lacked the authority to do the jobs they needed to do, in part because I would actually say, while the policy mandates this, it isn't properly phrased how the reporting occurs in this. The reporting should be given either to an audit committee or to the board directly, and not to administrators. But that isn't, in my view, that is not an example of why the position should not. I don't think the conclusion is supported by the premise, right? I mean, we hire plenty of individuals who are great at their job, and every now and then we hire somebody who's bad at their job. We do not just eliminate the position altogether. We still have an HR. We still have a superintendent, right? I mean, it's not like we just said, well, that didn't work, so goodbye. So I don't think, that point is not well taken to me, because I don't think I just don't think that the facts that that individual was bad at their job, or those two individuals were bad at their job, or whatever the issue was, that there wasn't clear guidance on what they were supposed to do, what have you, supports the premise that the position altogether is not needed, because research suggests quite the opposite. On that, let me ask you a question. The telephone audit, how much money, or what is the projected savings there? Because $100,000, right? Over $100,000, very significant, identified by an individual. I believe Debbie Spalding, was that who, or did who? Part of that, okay. So great work on that. And I agree, that is entirely my point. In the state of Arizona, given our budgeting and funding, I don't know if forming a department would be cost effective or useful. I've largely conceded that. That is just the state of this state. But on the other hand, I do think, again, it is great that people bring these things up and point out, hey, I think this is a problem here, or it's not. But it is a profession. Internal auditing is a specific profession. Inspector General, internal auditing, specific profession about coordinating these, identifying these priority areas, supervising the work of the external internal auditors that we hire, bring in the consultants that we need, identify which vendors, the procurements we need to go out for, that sort of thing. So I'm not disagreeing with the fact that chances are in this state, because of how it is, that unless we did an IGA, we probably will need to rely on external internal auditors who have the specific expertise in those areas, which is perfectly allowed for internal audit functions because they're independent third parties. At the same time, the internal auditor is doing a big job, and again, I would point to, who do we go to? I mean, if there's an issue or something arises, how do we schedule a meeting on that? I mean, yes, of course, I can sit here and go, hey, we need to have a meeting on this issue, but that requires other board members' support. If the board is saying, well, we don't want to hear about this, and all these people are coming up here with fake news, I mean, what is anyone supposed to do? So my point is that I fully agree with Mr. Gadd and Dr. Creekart on this, that in this state, absent, as I said, some big master plan of an IGA or something, which maybe no other district ever wants to even touch or trust, we have to rely on these external internal auditors. I concede that. But do we need to have somebody here who is specialized in the areas to coordinate all of that, supervise that, present these findings to us? I mean, I don't know if those were even going to be presented to us absent this conversation, the $100,000 savings. I don't know. But, that was the first time I had heard of it, that we were even doing an internal audit of that area, other than by an employee who happened to mention it to me. So, the board, it's still an issue. I mean, if they're presenting these findings to the administrators, and the administrators are being, let's just say the report comes out and says, you guys are doing pretty well, but actually, here's where you guys are going awry. I mean, if the administrators never present that to us, and they just bury it, I mean, what is to Vice President Beckman's point, I mean, what is the communication? Who do we have here who, no matter what, changing CFOs, changing superintendents, changing assistant superintendents, who are we entrusting to actually ensure that this is independent and that we were receiving the information we deserve to receive, that the public is able to receive the information it deserves to receive? And more importantly, all of these departments have set up whistleblower policies and whistleblower complaints. Where is that? Where is the protection here for that? Yes, there's federal laws on the point, but what are the channels? We are lucky that we have, as Vice President Beckman says, we are lucky to have you guys here. That will not always be the case, and so I really do think that we need to think pretty long and hard about simply saying, well, we're just going to rely on people to come up with ideas in our administration of priority areas, which is very useful, and find these savings of 100,000 here, $1 million there, that we can put into classrooms. Excellent, awesome. That's exactly what I'm looking for. But there is a whole other aspect there of the independence and the assurance that people are receiving the information, that these the recommendations we receive are being implemented. Because you know what, as I said, you make innocent mistakes, you make intentional mistakes. If you have the power to control that flow of information, I don't know I do not know what we as a district have done to help prevent what happened in the past from happening again. I think that's the question. I think that's probably the question most of the public are asking. It's great that we have hired such capable people, but these people come and go. And most HR professionals will probably, from reports I read back in years ago, a lot of HR professionals will say, 30+% of the people we hire we think are a great fit or perfect, they turn out to be not a great fit for a company. We got to get rid of them. That's just a fact of life. So that's what I'm trying to get at. I concede all these points, but the question is what have we done? Because I know for a fact that we haven't done anything, actually. That's the truth. Other than hire great people and get lucky that someone would even come and work for us.
Okay, so Board Member Kravitz, did you have a question? Okay.
I guess I would say, and I don't want to belabor this because I can see that
Right.
we are at an impasse, and I know that President Beckham will be watching this, and then she and I will talk. But I would just say it's not just a matter of luck, because you've hired us, we have hired people, and others were involved in the hiring. And I look at our purchasing director, Eva Dino. Okay, so she came to us from another district with experience. Doug Virgil knew her, was involved in hiring her, and she knew the kind of person she was, and she has revamped the purchasing department to make sure that we are always in compliance. And she had a history for that. And I think it's important that you hire people who will bring the right people with them. And yes, I will use the word lucky. I feel that I was really lucky at the late date to be able to hire the cabinet that I was able to hire, and that was attracted still to come to Scottsdale and work here. But nobody was hired blindly. They were all hired with a very close look at their resume and their history of work. So it's not just a matter of luck. It's a matter of hiring people who have that history and resume of making right decisions, not worried about whether a department that they supervise had to go through a review and a redo of some of their procedures. That's part of progress, and you hire people who are growth minded, if you will.
Okay, I want to get my arms around this a little bit and what we're doing going forward. So I can do this now and ask because we're on this item, or in future items, I suppose. On one hand, I'm curious if we're going to eventually have as an action item that we hire an internal auditor. I'm not sure. Or we're going to continue doing what we have done before, as the recommendation seems to be, which is to just hire external auditors in certain areas. So can I get a little clarity on that?
Yes, I will have that discussion with President
Okay.
Beckham as to which direction she would like to go, as I can see she appears to be the swing vote. So
Okay.
as to whether we present this or not to the board.
Great. Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Board Member Greenberg.
Just really quickly, I appreciate those comments and I agree with them. My only addition will be that even under Dr. Birdwell, there were hires that were made that were honest, hardworking people who did raise their concerns, and those were buried.
Okay. Any further comments or questions? Board Member Perleberg.
Okay, I'll make this brief, but it's a point that I don't want to forget about in the future. I don't know where all these discussions will go necessarily, but I would like to kind of shine a light on the past in our district. And I know that our community, especially those internally in SUSD, we've seen such, since the recession, or especially during the recession, but it kind of started even before that. But during the recession, we did lose so much staff. There were such significant cuts in leadership, in administrative cuts. As we had to take such harsh looks at the budget, everyone would say, how many layers of admin do we need? How many layers of leaders do we need? And that's always sensitive in our community. And at the time, yes, what that meant is people were cut, people moved up into positions maybe they weren't ready for, hardworking, trying hard, but yeah, they were thrown into the fire. And I think with that being our history and recognition that, yeah, not only do we need external people coming in, assessing our practices, the strength of our leadership within, we haven't been able to spend dollars to train them well, to make sure they have all the support they need in education, ironically, but to be trained, to be supported with their knowledge so they can do a great job, because we all know they want to. So I just kind of wanted to throw that lens into the discussions moving forward as well. Thank you.
Any further comments or questions? Okay, thank you. We move to our next public comment. And I have all the cards, I believe. Our first speaker is going to be Danny Brown.
Hi, who brought pizza? Golly, gee whiz. Hi. The overwhelming success of the SUSD budget override last November proved that when citizens are reminded of the critical role SUSD's quality schools play in our community, residents respond positively. More than 6 out of 10 voters chose to renew the override, which was a new record for the voter support for the school district. Now, following the campaign, our steering committee agreed that if that intense 4-month effort produced such significant support for SUSD, just imagine how much support for the school district we could generate with an ongoing effort. And that's why Yes to Children will be continuing to advocate for SUSD not only during bond and budget override elections, but also through 2020 and beyond. 2020 is going to be a pivotal year for SUSD. A new superintendent and governing board elections. And by the way, buddy, I'm going to miss you. Thank you for your service. Where was I? I envision Yes to Children hosting superintendent candidates and governing board candidates for community forums. Give this engaged community an opportunity to ask the questions that are important to them. I do feel the need to mention that our steering committee meetings, that at some of those, the idea of an auditor was raised. This idea was supported by all. Now, okay, I'm off script. Let's kind of cut to the chase. You know, us folks on the outside, we want to make sure that what happened over the last couple of years never happens again. Plain and simple. We want the money spent right. We vote for the money. Let's make sure it gets where it's going and it's right. Now, moving right along. The committee felt that transparency would help all forget the past and provide trust for the future. We are very proud of our SUSD. 2019 was a transformational year thanks to a bunch of you folks. Let's continue the positive momentum. Thank you. Oh, it's time left.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Okay, Carrie Kurland.
Okay. Good evening, board members and Superintendent Creekard. On behalf of the Scottsdale Education Association, I want to wish you all a belated Happy New Year. My name's Carrie Kurland. I serve as the secretary for the Scottsdale Education Association, and I've been an SUSD teacher for 23 years. As we begin the new year, although she's not here, as we begin the new year, I want to thank Patty Beckman for her leadership as president of the board during 2019 and the successful budget override campaign. Thank you, Patty. On behalf of SUSD teachers, although she's not here, I want to welcome our new board's president, Allison Beckham. SEA looks forward to working with her and all board members on school district priorities during 2020-21. Please continue to consider teachers as a resource. I was glad to see the discussion tonight regarding the auditor issue. I can think of no better way to begin the year than by addressing how to make sure the district is accountable to the community. While there may be a difference of opinion about how to resolve the auditor issue, I believe we all agree the importance of the district being fiscally responsible. It's not enough to say we're fiscally responsible. As recent history shows, taxpayers expect school districts to prove it. Putting in place an auditing system without further delay is imperative to the school district's credibility and important to maintaining taxpayers' trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ferlin. Okay, we move on now to our consent agenda. I move to approve the consent agenda as presented. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Perleberg seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The consent agenda is approved 4-0. We have no action items, so we will move on from public comment there. Do I have any future items? Board Member Kravitz.
Yes, I would like to ask that we discuss, I would like to ask that we discuss, or I don't know if it's still on the calendar, our school start schedule and bus schedule. It's kind of combined issue. Don't know when that's coming. And I would also like to request that we do a survey of parents that have chosen another option for their child other than SUSD, so we can get a better understanding of why we've had parents leave our district. And let's see what else. Yeah, those are my two requests. Thank you.
Okay. Board Member Greenberg.
I'd like to add on to Board Member Kravitz's last point. It would be great, it would be great to have a discussion about how we can start surveying people who come to our district and people who leave our district and why, and figure out a system for gathering that information. So I fully support that. I would like, since we are appointing a new, hopefully, superintendent, and they will do their own organization and reorganization of the district. But I would like to have a meeting just to understand where we currently are with our organizational chart, what roles we have, positions, comparative analysis of that type. And I'm happy to speak with you after the meeting or at another time to clarify that. But just to see comparative analysis as we talked about, I think the last time we did that was in December of 2018, last time that we spoke about that. So it would be nice just to kind of have a broad overview of that. And I would be remiss if the day after Martin Luther King Day, an individual who fought passionately for civil rights, economic justice, and poverty, as well, teachers unions, not to ask again that we discuss how our working relationship with the SEA and how we can maybe re-implement the collective bargaining process. Thank you.
Okay, any others? No? Okay, moving to our dates of upcoming meetings. The next meeting is Tuesday, February 4th, 2020, 5 p.m., a special board meeting at the MDA. Tuesday, February 18th, 2020, 5 p.m., a regular governing board meeting here at Coronado High School. Moving on to governing board reports. Are there any reports? Board Member Kravitz.
Since you mentioned Martin Luther King, I just wanted to comment on the Fabulous Voices program that Saguaro High School once again hosted, and we heard from the coach of the ASU's football team, Herm Edwards. I'm sorry, I don't follow football. Sorry. Anyway, so I know Ms. Beckman was there, and Mrs. Perlberg, and Mrs. Beckham was there as well.
It was wonderful.
It was a great event, as usual.
Agree.
Thank you.
Okay, I also wanted to comment that I had the good fortune to attend a meeting with State Superintendent Hoffman as she spoke to our speech language pathologists. It was very informative and meaningful, and for all that attended. I took the time and the opportunity to thank her for talking to our SLPs and for the health and safety grants awarded to Tonalea and Coronado. Thank you. Okay, I move to adjourn the meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
The motion's been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting is adjourned at 7:38.